Did you know that in the capitalist United Kingdom you can get arrested and thrown in jail just for opposing genocide?
Our government is actively involved in a genocide. There are people being gunned down in queues for AIDS. And the government is using terror laws.
Oi, stop kicking legs around or I'll put you in leg restraints. It's entirely up to you.
Guys, interlock the legs together. Both hands. There we go. Solid. Moving.
Our government is using anti-terror laws to silence people who are taking action against this genocide. Sign up at wedonotcomply.org.
You can get arrested and thrown in jail just for going on a Zoom call. You can get arrested and thrown in jail for up to 14 years for even supporting an activist group whose crime is shutting down arms factories.
To the UK now, where protests are taking place calling for the ban on Palestine action to be reversed. The government proscribed it as a terrorist organisation earlier this month. Since then, police have arrested dozens of people for supporting the group.
Policing in the UK and across many capitalist countries is getting increasingly repressive, gaining more and more power, and is ready-made for domination by emergent fascism. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about the controversy, if that's the word you want to use, surrounding punk act Bob Vylan's performance at Glastonbury the other week. After leading the crowd in chants of for an illustrative example of the chilling effect of this kind of police investigation, I'm going to redo that. After leading the crowd in a controversial chants, the police and establishment media went into a frenzy. We had police launching a criminal investigation into both Bob Vylan and the Irish rapper's Kneecaps performances on the grounds of potential public order offences. And the US, obviously not getting off light here as well, revoked Bob Vylan's visas for their upcoming American tour, and they were dropped by their management. All the while, the media was going into a panic. Everywhere you looked, there were discussions of the unique evil of Bob Vylan's performance, the fear, the chance of death to an occupying genocidal force could cause.
Parliament will have seen, as I have, the appalling and unacceptable scenes at Glastonbury on Saturday, where chants of death to the IDF and river to the sea, amongst others, were broadcast to the nation.
There were even discussions about whether Bob Vylan were worse than the Nazis.
I was going to say that they sometimes seem to have more in common with a Nuremberg rally, but even the Nazis did not scream death to the Jews at their rallies, even if they thought it, and that was their intention.
Andrew Neil, by the way, the character who was accused by Ben Shapiro of being too left-wing.
Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
Mr.
Seriously,
Shapiro,
it's a serious question.
Mr. Shapiro, if you only knew how ridiculous that statement is, you wouldn't have said it.
Just to put that discourse into some context for you here. But let's be clear about what Andrew Neil is doing in this clip. It's essentially soft Holocaust denial in service of Zionism. He's presenting Bob Vylan's chants as somehow worse than Nazism. He lessens the crimes of the Nazis and presents the industrial slaughter of Jews as less ontologically evil than the apparent crimes of Palestinian resistance and the expressions of solidarity. It's not hard to see this sort of anti-Semitic defense of Zionism as an expression of underlying white supremacy, like the orientalized Palestinian resistance and black performers like Bob Vylan are cast as ontologically violent, animalistic and evil.
Since the IDF is all that stands between Israel's survival and it being wiped out by its Islamist enemies, to call for the death of the IDF is tantamount to advocating a second Holocaust.
While white expressions of solidarity are viewed of as being tainted by racially coded wokery.
At Glastonbury, a generation which wallows in woke,
the Holocaust is implied to be a regrettable aberration in European history that even the Nazis weren't fully on board with, while Zionism is presented as a defence against the dark forces of the inherently murderous Orient. Thus, expressions of Palestinian solidarity need to be heavily policed, if not stamped out entirely from society. And you can see this need to stamp out Palestinian solidarity throughout the media. You know, I was flicking through the news channels after the Vylan shenanigans, and every single channel was populated with quotes from government ministers like Lisa Nandy bemoaning BBC leadership and condemning the performance.
Parliament will have seen, as I have, the appalling and unacceptable scenes at Glastonbury on Saturday.
Lisa Nandy, by the way, former head of Labour Friends of Palestine, if you want an indication of just how superficial and co-opted expressions of solidarity with Palestine are within the Labour Party. But as Nandy was condemning all of this, there were talking heads all over the various news channels musing over how best to censor artists in future, while the BBC has announced that it will no longer broadcast high-risk artists. Who decides what is an expression of high-risk artistry? Well, the state broadcaster, of course, with little to no democratic engagement. These aren't the impersonal market forces of propaganda. This is explicit propaganda handed down by the state. With both Kneecap and Bob Vylan understood as high risk, it seems pretty clear that high risk just means Palestine solidarity. They were even discussing whether Bob Vylan's chants were an incitement to violence, as if the crowd at Glastonbury were going to hear the chant and think, yeah, I am going to get on a flight right over to Israel, take up arms, and join the fight for liberation of Palestine. But that obviously was not going to happen. There was no risk of that. And of course, this kind of censorship, policing, isn't just confined to the UK. In Germany, for example, there's been a massive ramping up of police repression of Palestine solidarity, while in the US, people are being disappeared off of the street and university encampments are being attacked and students arrested, all in the name of anti-Palestinian solidarity, of defending Zionism. But of course, this kind of heavy-handed state censorship and policing in defence of Zionism hasn't come out of the blue. It's not just sprung out of nowhere. It is part of a long history of violent repressive policing in service of capitalism and its racial regime. And since the inauguration of neoliberalism, policing has only gotten more authoritarian. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the dramatic expansion of police power, the direction of this expansion, and how it serves the far right, and finally, how such authoritarian creep is embedded within neoliberalism. I'm going to focus on the UK, but the tendencies that I'm talking about here are present across neoliberal states. So if you're not from the UK, have a look at the expansion of police powers where you live, because if you care about building any kind of positive future, you will need a strategy to resist policing. So starting with Margaret Thatcher, which is, as bad a place as any to start, policing in the UK has gone increasingly powerful. And we often think about Thatcher's war against the miners as a major inaugurating moment of neoliberalism in Britain. But less often discussed is how she radically expanded police power in order to win her war. Transform the police into a fighting force ready to take on the militant miners, Thatcher centralised Britain's disparate policing forces while providing material incentives to police officers and to the police as such to get them on board with her radical vision of neoliberal Britain. So throughout the early years of her government, senior police officers gave more and more statements justifying extreme policing as necessary to counteract both communism and racial threats from Black and South Asian communities in particular. But it wasn't just the police, and the threat of the miners' strike and the shadow of communism that was haunting Europe was such that the UK's spy agencies also shifted focus from foreign affairs to spying on the miners, and this expansion of the repressive police and secret service power was instrumental in clearing away public opposition and material opposition to neoliberalism in the UK. But it didn't stop after the miners were defeated. Power doesn't give itself up. After the defeat of the miners, the ire of these newly empowered police turned towards other social movements, and especially to environmental groups like the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and animal rights groups. MI5 worked alongside the police to spy on, infiltrate and undermine those groups.
Yeah, shocking really, but that's exactly what happened to our next guest, Eleanor Fairbreda. She discovered her lover and close friend of 7 years was posing as a committed environmental activist, but was actually a member of the police force sent to infiltrate her friendship group. Worse still, he was a married police officer. He had 2 children.
It has become apparent that some officers, acting undercover while seeking to infiltrate protest groups, entered into long-term intimate sexual relationships with women.
It was a real political education growing up in the 80s.
We were on the right side of history. That seems to be the thing that ties everyone together.
Trade unions, anti-racist politics,
social justice, LGBTQ rights, Palestine.
It is these people who are driving our society forward and to be a society which is more humane.
We were there, we were fighting our fights, which is what put us in the path of the police to begin with.
This trend of targeting environmental groups is a key through line to contemporary expansions of police power in the UK. So, jumping forward to the 2020s, police power is once again rapidly expanding and becoming ever more authoritarian. The UK's main police monitoring body, the Network for Police Monitoring, or NetPol, recently released their annual State of Protest report, which was simply titled, worryingly, "This is Repression." This report details in really fine detail how recent policing legislation, like the Police Courts Crimes and Sentencing Bill, have effectively criminalised large swathes of protest action in the UK, pushing policing into what they described as active repression. And let's be clear here, this is not a radical communist group, but quite an insider police monitoring body, made up of academics, made up of NGOs, people who are not on the fringes of society. They specifically detail how political attacks on climate change-related civil disobedience and Palestine solidarity activism have become the sort of central nodes around which police powers have expanded. So you can see the connections between animal rights, CND, climate action, as well as some of the sort of racialized attacks against South Asian and black communities, to Palestine solidarity, which is frequently racialized, as well as the attacks against the miners, who are a major power block against state reforms. You can see the sort of coalesce around contemporary expansions of police power. And these sort of expansions include things like the expansion of what police can consider serious disruption, and therefore a lowering of the threshold of arrest for what can be understood as serious disruption. And I've been involved in de-arrest attempts for people who've likely been lifted on these grounds. There's also been an expansion of stop and search powers, which are a major tool for criminalising black kids specifically, and an expansion of state security and terrorism laws, which have been used to criminalise the existence of the group Palestine Action.
Tension flares at a Palestinian Action protest in Trafalgar Square. Come next week, simply coming out in support of this group could become illegal. The Home Secretary has prescribed them, putting them in a basket with terrorist organisations such as Al-Qaeda and Islamic State.
Expressing support for this group can now come with a prosecution, a heavy, draconian prosecution, and in the defence of their decision to do this in court, when this group appealed their case, the government said, "We know this is draconian, we want it to be." They are aware of how authoritarian this is, and they want it to be that way. But this isn't the end of it. The Labour government is currently pushing through yet another authoritarian crime and policing bill, which builds on other recent legislation to do things like ban concealing your identity at a protest, ban climbing on monuments, ban protesting near places of worship, which is an obvious attempt to paint Palestinian solidarity as inherently anti-Semitic, quite clearly. The bill expands facial recognition powers, obviously combined with the ban on covering your face, is not great. And in a move which highlights the connections between policing and racist border policies, the police will be able to deport people who have valid limited leave to remain. So you can see the sort of racial elements mixed in with the protest elements, all within this sort of architecture of authoritarian power. All the high-profile cases that we see, from the criminal investigation into Bob Vylan to the jailing of 5 Just Stop Oil activists, including founder Roger Hallam, for an unprecedented 5 years for being on an organising Zoom call, these are all the results of the constantly expanding authoritarian policing in the UK. And it's not just through the police themselves that this expansion has occurred. Policing as an institutional function, as a logic, has expanded throughout the state. You know, in schools, things like the prevent duty, which is a so-called counter-extremism strategy which has been used to essentially prevent Muslim students from speaking about racism that they face or speaking about imperialism, and which has recently been focused on muting Palestine solidarity specifically. You know, I have a friend who was referred to the police under the prevent duty for, not for promoting Palestine, but for not adequately challenging a student on their Palestine solidarity pin. Universities have also become deeply imbricated within police logics. There's countless examples of university administrations collaborating with police to arrest students protesting institutional involvement, institutional ties with Israeli interests. But again, there's also more everyday police actions that university staff are required to undertake. Again, with the expansion of policing has come an increased policing of the border. Every single class that I have to teach these days requires me to take a register of who's present. This is so that the university can make sure that students who are coming in on a visa attend enough classes, and if they don't, they risk being deported. Now, we joke about Foucault saying everything is a prison, but his absolutely correct point is that policing is a logic which has spread throughout society. A logic that recruits teachers, lecturers, doctors, nurses, bosses and landlords as willing or unwilling enforcers of it. With bosses and landlords, it's often a way to further their exploitation of their tenants or their employees. The border is a tool to, drive down wages, to further exploit groups, to stop them engaging in collective action, which is obviously why so-called left-wing attempts to deal with immigration problems are completely non-starters. The only correct immigration policy is a complete decriminalisation of the border and just letting folk in. Snap that power away from bosses and landlords. That's how you do it. So, with this expansion of policing throughout society and the intensification of the authoritarian tools of the police, specifically, you might think, well, at least they'll stop the far-right extremism. And not to be rude to you, but if you do think that, come on now. Come on now. Netpol's investigation into policing found that, as everyone already knows, the police in the UK have consistently ignored and downplayed the threats of far-right violence in favour of cracking down on Palestine solidarity and climate protest. Internal police documents show senior officers describing the threat of right-wing violence as minimal. Quote, minimal. In a move which was shown to be completely, willfully or not, blind, as months later, fascist rioters took to the streets to attack Muslims and migrants and attempt to burn down a hotel which was housing asylum seekers. Legal observers from the counter-demonstrations repeatedly told Netpol that the police were more interested in the anti-fascists than the fascists. Shocking. And repeatedly racially profiled black and brown young people who were standing against the fash. What this is essentially confirming is what we all knew already. Who protects the fascists? The police protect the fascists. These tools are built for repression and for the far right. They are not built for any kind of, sterile law and order. Sterile law and order doesn't exist. It's always tending towards authoritarianism and always in line with dominant power. I mean, often the police are the fascists, and I mean that more so than just necessarily that all police are fash, which, of course, all police are fash. But the number of times that I've seen police at demos wearing thin blue line badges, which frame the police as the protectors of order from chaos, and started being used in response to Black Lives Matter. The obvious implication being that the police are the line between white order and black chaos. This badge has been designated a hate symbol by several organisations across the globe and was formerly banned by the Metropolitan Police, but I still consistently see it adorning police lapels in London. And outside of London they can still wear it, but I still see it being worn by Metropolitan Police officers. But the other night I switched on the TV and I just saw a jaunty Channel 4 documentary following two nice police lads doing good community safety work. Both were wearing thin blue line badges and were aggressively hectoring a foreign truck driver at the border. So this show happily narrated this apparently essential service the police do for us civvies and reinforced the absurdly authoritarian narrative about the police and hard borders being needed to keep us safe. It's just two good lads, two good police lads doing what they can to keep us safe against these nasty foreigners coming in here. It was a really, really clear example of how authoritarian policing is not only diffused throughout society, but culturally justified via media representations. Even when the police officers on screen are explicitly wearing far-right hate symbols. Who protects the fascists? The police protect themselves, and the media helps. So, as the criminal investigation against Bob Vylan continues, and as Palestine Action continue to challenge their criminalisation through the courts, we're going to be tempted to view the increase in policing as just a response to Palestine solidarity. But what I want to draw out here is that policing, especially under neoliberalism, always tends towards authoritarianism. Palestine and climate action is one key means through which this is happening, but it is an inherent feature of neoliberalism. And one of neoliberalism's core features is fundamentally a distrust of the people. The notion of the people, especially those who try to exert control over the economic, whether through unions or through demonstrations or through shutting down factories.
5 Just Stop Oil activists were handed historically long jail sentences for blocking the M25 back in November 2022, in which prosecutors alleged that the protests led to an economic cost of over £750,000.
For neoliberalism, policing is required to break the power of collective action. Just Stop Oil are toxic to neoliberalism because they try to disrupt the economic functioning of the state and exert some control over the levers of policy, which should rightly only ever be controlled by properly educated, properly economically minded technocrats. The rapid expansion of anti-protest police powers was always going to happen as neoliberalism continued to function. Similarly, we can't understand neoliberalism without understanding its racial construction. Neoliberalism in part emerged in response to the decolonisation moment, to the decolonisation of various parts of the global south. The exporting of production, the punitive neo-colonial legal structures like structural adjustment programmes and ISDSs, like I spoke about last time, these were essential to maintain a racially divided global productive regime. But more than this, neoliberal theory has always been filthy with white supremacy. In Hayek's Road to Serfdom, he invokes the supposed cultural superiority of Anglo-Saxon market culture against inferior orientalised non-market cultures, thus justifying harsh border regimes, which characterise neoliberal society, and, as Aaron Kundnani argues, creates a peculiar form of neoliberal cultural racism, the figure of which is often the Muslim invader. Neoliberalism appeared within an unflushed toilet of white supremacist imperialism. It never broke from that sewer soup. When policing is used to crack down on dissent, it's not a surprise, nor a break from neoliberal governance, but it's constant expansion. And so it's unsurprising that the expansion of policing of Palestine solidarity has so often been connected to an expansion of anti-terror legislation.
2 Palestinian students based in London were convicted of conspiracy to bomb the Israeli embassy in 1994. And MI5 had documents which they did not disclose to the defence. And if they had disclosed the documents, it's probable that the jury would not have convicted these 2 young people. So they covered up and continued to cover up this miscarriage of justice for many years. And in fact, the 2 students ended up serving 15 years in prison each. It was an appalling case.
The terrorist, as Edward Said argues, has long been associated with both Orientalised ideas of Islam as such and with the figure of the Palestinians specifically, as an eternal terrorist. And since the end of the Cold War and neoliberalism's unchallenged rise to global ascendancy, the terrorist, this Orientalised figure, has become the great devil of Western secular theology. So when Home Secretary Yvette Cooper used terror legislation to prescribe Palestine Action as a terror group, she became a sort of symbolic node of all of these disparate but connected threads of authoritarian policing. The racial animus directed towards Palestine and Orientalised hordes, and the authoritarian tendency to protect the state from any influence of the people from outside the high fences of Parliament. And so, as we continue careering down the path to fascism, as our leaders in the centre-left Labour Party continue to expand police powers, what they are doing and what we need to be ready to deal with is creating a repressive apparatus ready-made for fascist domination. Police never give up power. It can only ever be taken. Fascists never refuse power. They can only be stopped. Right, thanks for watching. This is going to be slightly ASMR because I'm recording this at midnight from my parents' house. But thanks for watching. I hope you all like this. I hope you all like this kind of whispery end. One thing that I think you should remember going forward, especially if you're in the UK but not only, rethink how you bring phones to protests. Try get a burner. The police will use excuses to take your phones and to steal them. Okay? Alright, other than that, I hope you enjoyed this kind of ranty video. I'm slowly losing my mind as everything goes forward, and I think you probably are as well. As ever, remember to like and subscribe after all that, and if you can, sign up to my Patreon, give the video a share. The last one didn't do too well at all, so hopefully this one does quite better. And if you can, sign up to my Patreon or give a one-off donation via Ko-fi. Patrons of $5 and ups get things like access to Discord servers, early access to videos, video scripts, and stuff like that. And $5 and up also get their names read out in the credits, which I will do now. We have Demo Squid, Dying of Thirst, Solval Hayes, Daniel Swing, Errol Grey T, Bonnie, Joshua Moldenhauer, Nina G Public Relations, FD Signifier, Quint Wolf, Kim Crawley, Anita Anisby, Ellis Wren, S, Hey Joe, Cameron Blakemore, Paul, Jacob Quinn-Schenker, Mason Colbert, Alex, Tim, Unoriginal Name, Rachel Ann, Melanie Estes, Layum, Xander Corvus, Via Westfall, Jack, TB Skyen, Christopher Poff, Mark Gussie, Tom Price, Kate Soiree, Esoteric Fictionalism, Robin, Rachel Mixon, Duncan Skinner, Niels Abelgard, Tinfoil Pancakes, Kieran Gore, Aga Ghost, Barney Carroll, Joe, Daniel Hughes, Nelly Zacheva, J. Fraser Cartwright, Aaron, Tamish Kispeter, and Paul Singleton. And yeah, if you like this video, again, give it a like, give it a share, and if you like this ASMR, I don't know what to tell you. I posted a video singing a song recently, you might like that too. Bye, love you.